A temple complex in Turkey. It's older than farming. That fact alone, it breaks the traditional story of human progress. You look at it, and the origins of civilization start to look different. Hunter-gatherers buried their greatest sanctuary. They did it on purpose, and the pillars, they have these carvings, cosmic stories. The answers you find, they force a rewrite. History changes, and then you have to ask, what does human advancement actually look like? 11,000 years. That's a long time to try and hold in your mind. You're standing there in southeastern Turkey, looking back across this chasm. The world was still cold then. The ice was pulling back, but that cold was still in everything. In the air, in the ground, it was a hinge point, the tail end of one age, the Pleistocene, giving way to the warmer one we're in now, the Holocene. Everything was changing. The climate and what was possible, and in the middle of all that change, a group of people did something that, if you read the old textbooks, they shouldn't have been able to do. They built something to last. The story we usually tell is like a ladder, a straight line. First you survive, you hunt, you gather, then you get control. You settle down, you plant crops, you tame animals, you create extra food, and then with that stability, with that spare time, you can build things. You make art, you form religions, you raise monuments. It's a clean order. Survival, then farming, then civilization. But Göbekli Tepe, it's like a question mark made of stone. It turns that order upside down because the people who built it were hunter-gatherers, people who, by the old logic, should have been completely focused on just finding their next meal. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who worked there for decades, he said it was like finding a cathedral built in a wilderness by a society that wasn't supposed to have towns. The scale of it is what gets you. These aren't just piles of rock, they're these huge T-shaped pillars, some weigh more than 10 tons. They were cut from quarries, moved hundreds of meters, stood upright, fitted into carved sockets in these stone rings. This wasn't a small job. This was a project for generations. It needed coordination, a shared vision, a kind of social organization that nobody thought nomadic people had back then. So you have to rethink what drives us, what comes first. It suggests that the urge to build something permanent, something bigger than yourself, something for the cosmos, maybe that urge isn't a result of having extra resources. Maybe it's the thing that creates the extra resources, that need to gather for a sacred purpose, to work together. That could have been the practice, the training for the cooperation you'd later need for farming. The temple, then, it might not be a monument to a way of life that was already settled. It might be the thing that made that settled life possible to imagine. The spark, that idea, that monumentality came first. It changes the whole picture of how society began. That neat ladder gets tangled up, cause and effect get woven together. Spirituality, community, they might have laid the first stones, long before anyone ever planted the first seed on purpose. The stones were waiting there, just under the surface of a hill. For decades they were almost found. A shepherd in the 60s would have seen them, shapes in the dirt, too regular, too smooth. He might have run a hand over the lines. Word reached archaeologists eventually, and they came to look, but they missed it. They saw broken slabs and decided it was nothing. A Byzantine cemetery, maybe. Just some medieval rubble they left, the greatest find of a generation, written off, left for another 30 years. The hill's name is Göbekli Tepe. Potbelly Hill, a humble name. It wasn't until 1994 that the secret broke through. A German archaeologist, Klaus Schmidt, was reading old survey reports. He saw the dismissive notes about that hill, but something didn't fit. He knew the area's history, so he went to see. What he found weren't headstones. They were the tips of massive limestone pillars, the tops of T-shaped megaliths carved with animals just emerging from the earth. Schmidt knew what they were instantly. This was far older. This was Neolithic, from a time before writing, before metal, before cities. He said later, in that first moment, he knew his life's work had found him. The excavation began. With each layer of soil removed, the truth of the place was revealed. It wasn't a single structure. It was a complex, multiple enclosures, circles of these towering pillars connected by low stone walls. They weren't built on the ground, they were built into it, carved right into the bedrock of the hill. The scale is hard to grasp. The largest pillars stood over 5.5 meters tall. Weighed more than 10 tons, quarried from local bedrock, moved up the hill, erected by people without the wheel, without domestic animals. But the most telling clue isn't just what they built. It's what they did to it long after. The entire complex, this breathtaking achievement, wasn't left to stand. It was deliberately filled in. Around 8000 BC, for reasons we can only guess, they took thousands of tons of soil and stone and debris and buried their own temple. They entombed it. This wasn't destruction. It was a ritual closing, a respectful return to the earth. That single act of burial is what preserved the carvings for us to find 11,000 years later. And it gives us the first great mystery of the place. Why would a society put in such monumental effort to build, only to put in an equal effort to hide it? That act of burial is the second great mystery. It's not a tomb, it's a time capsule, sealed with immense care by the people who built it. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, the site's active life ended. But the community didn't just walk away. They took on another monumental task. They gathered earth, stone, debris, thousands of tons of material, and they filled in the enclosures. They buried their own masterpiece. Why would they do that? The theories are as fascinating as the act. Some researchers say it was a ritual closure. The temple had served its purpose for centuries, maybe for a specific spiritual cycle. When that cycle was complete, the sacred space was returned to the earth. A final, respectful ceremony. It was retired, not destroyed. Another idea is protection. Beliefs were shifting. The world outside was changing. Agriculture was beginning. Maybe the old ways, the hunter-gatherer cosmology on these pillars, needed shielding from new ideas. By burying the complex, they preserved its power, hiding it from view but keeping its essence intact. Klaus Schmidt called this backfilling an act of profound intentionality. It wasn't a collapse, it wasn't an attack, it was a deliberate, labor-intensive process. That intentionality is what makes it so powerful. They didn't just stop using the site. They actively chose to remove it from the world, and that's the beautiful paradox. This act of concealment, meant to take the temple out of time, is what let it survive through time. The soil that filled those rings protected the limestone pillars from weathering, from being quarried for other projects, from the wear of the elements. It preserved the carvings with remarkable clarity for 11,000 years. The effort to hide the sanctuary became the key to its preservation. It makes you wonder, what beliefs were held here that were so potent, so sacred, that the ultimate act of reverence was to gently erase it from the landscape, to give it back to the hill it came from? The scale of it is hard to even grasp. They were moving mountains of stone with nothing but muscle, rope, and wood. The limestone came from the local bedrock, just a few hundred meters from the hilltop. But that distance is everything. How do you move a 10-ton block of stone, the size of a small bus, without wheels, without carts? The answer is an orchestrated effort. A kind of coordination we don't usually give to early societies. Take Pillar 43, over 5 meters tall, carved with animals. It weighs 10 to 12 tons. To get it from the quarry to the site, they probably used wooden rollers, freshly cut logs placed under the stone. Teams pulled with ropes, levering it forward. Moving the logs from the back to the front, a continuous, grueling cycle. It's immense coordination. every pull synchronized, every lever point calculated by feel. The incline up the hill needed even more people, maybe a ramp of earth and stone to reduce the angle. This wasn't a few dozen individuals, this was a community-wide project, pulling together for a purpose beyond any single person. And once the pillar arrived, the work was only half done. They had to stand it upright. They carved precise rectangular sockets into the living bedrock of the summit. To lift the pillar, they likely dug a pit beside it, tilted the stone over the hole, used levers and ropes to gradually walk it vertical, packing the socket tight with smaller stones. The precision is stunning. These T-shaped pillars aren't crude slabs. They're shaped, smooth, designed. The crossbar of the T might be arms or shoulders. A stylized, silent guardian, and they weren't alone. They were arranged in circles, often two larger central pillars surrounded by smaller ones, all linked by stone walls and low benches ringing the interior. This was architecture, planned, executed, and repeated over centuries across multiple enclosures. This changes how we see hunter-gatherers. To organize labor on this scale, there had to be a social structure, capable of planning, delegating, sustaining effort over a long period, a system for feeding and housing the workers. It suggests a social complexity, a hierarchy, or at least a powerful shared ideology, something we never knew existed before farming. The temple didn't just require a society to build it. The act of building it may have forged that society, teaching them the cooperation, the organization that would later reshape their entire world. The real voice of Göbekli Tepe isn't about scale, it's on the surface. The pillars and the walls are covered in stone, a whole collection of animals frozen. You see a pillar and there's a fox looking back, its body tense, carved deep. Another one has a crane, its neck stretched long toward the sky, a boar charging, a snake coiled, a scorpion with its tail up, a warning in the limestone. This isn't just decoration, it's a dense story, a stone menagerie. Every surface that could take a carving has one. These animals aren't calm, they're active, fierce. They have this wild energy. They are the world these people knew, made by an artist's hand for a storyteller's reason. But what was that reason? The carvings are our only direct link to their minds. A window into a spiritual world older than any scripture. One view is their totems, symbols for different clans or families who gathered to build. Each animal representing a group's identity, their part in the whole thing. The fox clan, the crane clan, the snake clan, all working together under these symbols. Another idea, deeper, is that these aren't just animals, they are gods, or powerful spirits. The builders were hunter-gatherers. Their survival, their whole understanding of the world was tied to these creatures. To carve them this grandly, to put them at the center of this place, means they were objects of worship and fear and prayer. Maybe the rituals here were talking to the spirit of the hunt, or asking for balance in a dangerous world. Then there's the sky. Some researchers see the arrangements and think of constellations. A snake here, a scorpion there, matching the stars from that time. The temple becomes an observatory then, a stone model of the heavens, connecting their myths to the movement of the cosmos. Among the most confusing symbols are the bags, stylized pouch-like shapes, sometimes held by what look like arms on the T-pillars. These same forms show up in later Mesopotamian art, and surprisingly, in carvings from ancient Central America. They're a mystery. Are they holders for something sacred, symbols of knowledge or plenty? Their echo across the world suggests a symbolic language that was more widespread, or maybe came from a shared, deep part of human thought. Each animal, each symbol, is a word in a story we've lost. The fox isn't only a fox, it's cunning, the night, a guide. The crane is long life, a messenger between earth and sky. The scorpion is danger, protection, a line you don't cross. Together they make a complex mythology, a spiritual guide carved to last. They make you ask the basic question: What epic were these people telling about the world, about where they fit, that needed such a huge, permanent stone page to tell it? But if you look at these stones, at all these animals, what's not there is just as important as what is. This place is older than farming, so you wouldn't expect farms. But if you think ahead to sites just a few thousand years later, the art changes completely. You see sheaves of grain, fat, stylized sheep, pots full of food. That art is about fertility, harvest, controlling nature. It's a domesticated world. Now look back here, look at the foxes, the cranes, the scorpions, the snakes. There's no carved wheat, no obedient flock, no image of a tamed animal or a cultivated plant. The world on these pillars is completely wild. That absence says something. It's a confirmation right from the stone. The people who carved this weren't farmers. Their minds, their myths, their spiritual focus was on the untamed forces of the natural world. These animals aren't resources to be managed, they're powers. To be respected or appeased or invoked. The fox is cunning, the scorpion is danger, the crane is a messenger. These are the beings that govern their universe. And that reinforces the timeline of this place. It was built in a window when humanity's relationship with nature was starting its biggest shift. But that shift hadn't happened here yet. The art captures that moment, right on the edge before the turn toward domestication. Experts point to this omission as some of the strongest evidence for the site's age and purpose. This wasn't a temple for giving thanks for a harvest. It was a temple for engaging with the raw, unpredictable forces that decided whether a hunt would succeed, whether a herd would pass by, whether the group would survive. The focus was on the hunt, on that dangerous, vital negotiation with the wild. So this third mystery isn't about something hidden. It's about something that was never there. And that empty space tells a story of a worldview poised for a revolution. Soon, the human hand would start reshaping the world. But here, in these silent circles, humanity was still looking outward. Speaking to the wilderness and listening for its reply, the temple breaks that image, the idea of small families wandering. To build something like Göbekli Tepe, you need a crowd. A congregation. It wasn't a village, it was a destination, a sacred place that drew people in from across the whole region, probably at specific times of the year. Like a pilgrimage, a massive seasonal festival, the hilltop was a magnet. For generations, hunter-gatherer groups knew to gather there when the seasons turned. When certain stars appeared for ceremonies we can't fully understand, these were complex hunter-gatherers. That term matters. Their world wasn't just scarcity. It wasn't constant movement. The area around Göbekli Tepe 11,000 years ago was rich, part of the Fertile Crescent, but the fertility wasn't from farms yet. It was wild abundance, vast herds of gazelle migrating through, thick stands of wild wheat and barley, rivers and springs. This was a land of plenty. If you knew how to harvest it, that natural wealth meant people could stay in an area longer, or more importantly, they could afford to come together. In large numbers for a time, they could pool the food they'd gathered and stored. They could support a temporary, dense population, all focused on a sacred task. That's the social innovation hidden in the stone, cooperation on a scale never tried before, for a goal that wasn't about immediate survival. They weren't building a wall against predators. They weren't digging a granary, they were raising pillars to the sky, carving stories for the spirits. That non-utilitarian purpose is key. It means they were working for something abstract. For belief, for community identity, that kind of project requires a new level of organization, leaders or planners to direct the work, craftspeople with specialized skills in stone. A system to feed hundreds, maybe thousands of people over months. These seasonal gatherings were the crucible. In gathering, working, living together for these intense periods, they were inventing society. As we know it, they were learning how to resolve disputes in a crowd, how to divide labor, how to maintain a shared vision across years and decades. The temple didn't just require a complex society to build it. The act of building it taught them how to be a complex society. The rituals may have been for the spirits of the hunt, but the real, lasting magic was happening among the people. They were practicing, stone by stone, the cooperation that would soon turn wild grasses into crops and wild herds into flocks. The festival ground was quietly becoming a training ground. For the future, the animal bones, the sheer number of them, that's what you notice. Archaeologists going through the fill, the material that buried the enclosures. They found stone tools, yes, but they also found a staggering amount of butchered remains, gazelle, aurochs, wild boar, enough to feed hundreds of people, maybe thousands. So this wasn't just a place for quiet ritual. It was a place for feasting, large-scale gathering, which means planning, logistics. Where did all that food come from? How was it prepared? The feast becomes a central clue. It changes the site from a solitary temple to a periodic hub, a place where the sacred and the communal were woven together. That evidence pushes you to look beyond a simple label. Calling it just a temple feels too narrow. It likely served multiple functions, functions that our modern categories struggle to separate. Think about the layout, those separate circular enclosures, some larger, some smaller, each with its own character. They could have served different purposes within one ritual cycle. One enclosure might have been for the big gatherings, the feasts. Another, more secluded, might have been for initiation, passing knowledge to the next generation in a space full of carved symbols. The animal pillars themselves could have been teaching tools, illustrating myths, star lore, the proper relationships between humans and the spirit world. Then there's the orientation. Some researchers have pointed out that the central pillars in certain enclosures seem aligned with celestial bodies, solstices maybe. The rise of key stars, if that's true, then the complex wasn't just about earthbound spirits. It was also an observatory, a calendar in stone, tying the community's rituals to the cycles of the cosmos. That fusion of astronomy and mythology, you see it in sacred sites across millennia, and the knowledge repository idea. In a world without writing, how do you preserve a complex belief system? You encode it in architecture and art, the act of building, placing each fox and crane in a specific relationship that could have been a way of solidifying a shared cosmology. The site becomes a three-dimensional library, a memory palace made of limestone where every pillar is a chapter. This functional ambiguity is the revelation. It challenges our need to compartmentalize. For the people who built it, there likely was no separation between the ritual feast, the astronomical observation, the initiation, the act of building itself. It was all one holistic practice. Göbekli Tepe was the central node, the place where a scattered population periodically came together to renew everything that held them together. Their social bonds, their shared identity, their spiritual contract with the world. This wasn't just a building where they practiced their culture. It was the engine that generated that culture. And that role as a cultural engine that might hold the key to its most profound legacy, how a place of stone might have directly triggered a new way of life. There's a fourth mystery at the site, a quieter one. Where did the builders actually live? After decades of digging across the whole hilltop, archaeologists found something. They found an absence, no house foundations, no permanent hearths for daily fires, no deep trash pits full of the debris you get from people living in a place. The area is clean, remarkably clean of domestic life, and that's not an oversight, it's a feature. It tells us the core of Göbekli Tepe was purely ceremonial. A sacred precinct. People came here for a purpose, they performed their rituals and then they left. It was a destination, not a hometown. That separation is profound. Think of a cathedral built in a wilderness, no city around it. Pilgrims would travel from their home territories, gather for a season, contribute to the work or to the ceremonies. share in those great feasts, the ones we see in the animal bones, and then they'd return back to their regular, more dispersed lives. The site functioned like a massive, ancient festival ground, used intensely for specific periods, maybe aligned with solstices or migrations or spiritual cycles, and then quiet for the rest of the year. That pattern of seasonal use fits with complex hunter-gatherers. They weren't rootless, they had home ranges, smaller camps, territories they returned to, but they were mobile enough and their social bonds were strong enough to coordinate these grand seasonal rendezvous. Planning for such a gathering, knowing when and where to meet, that implies a shared calendar, a communicated tradition, passed down, but the implication goes deeper than logistics. This physical separation, the sacred space apart from everyday life, it represents a cognitive leap. It shows a sophisticated division of the world. The profane world was for hunting, gathering, cooking, sleeping, the routine of survival. The sacred world, here on this hill, was set apart. A place where daily concerns were left behind, where attention focused entirely on the monumental, the spiritual, the cosmic. They created a buffer between the mundane and the divine. That's a hallmark of complex thought. It's the architectural expression of an abstract idea that some places, some activities exist on a different plane. That you must prepare, you must journey, you must enter a designated space to engage with the powers that govern existence. By building this boundary not with a fence, but with the very absence of their own homes, they made the sanctuary itself the threshold. Every time they walked onto that hill, they were stepping out of one world and into another. This conceptual division, it might be one of Göbekli Tepe's greatest gifts to the human story. And it's most subtle. It shows a mind capable of creating categories for reality itself, and that mental architecture, the ability to hold the sacred apart, might have been the necessary foundation for everything that came after. The stones themselves don't have dates, no inscriptions, no king lists, no written records of how they were made, and for an archaeologist, that's a fundamental puzzle. How do you assign a calendar year to a structure built from rock by a people who left no written language? The answer isn't in the pillars, it's in the earth around them. The act that sealed the temple, its deliberate burial, became the key to its age. When the builders backfilled the enclosures, they mixed in tiny fragments of their own time. Charcoal from their fires, animal bones from their feasts, even microscopic bits of plant material. These organic bits became time capsules. Scientists used radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of a radioactive isotope in once living matter. By analyzing samples from the fill layers, they could pinpoint when that material stopped absorbing carbon from the atmosphere the moment it was buried. The results were consistent and staggering. The material used to bury the earliest enclosures dated to around 9,600 years before the Common Era, which meant the structures themselves had to be older, much older. Further confirmation came from the tools left behind. The flint and obsidian blades, scrapers, and projectile points found on site were of a style known from other, datable sites in the region. A typology called pre-pottery Neolithic A, and it fits perfectly within the same time frame. The scientific evidence converged into a single fact. The oldest rings at Göbekli Tepe were erected around 11,600 years ago. That empirical backbone transforms the site from a fascinating anomaly into a chronological anchor. It confirms a reality that rewrites timelines. This complex, with its monumental architecture and sophisticated art, wasn't a product of early farming villages. It was a creation of the very last hunter-gatherers at the very dawn of the Neolithic age. That solid date makes the accomplishment more profound. It pushes a boundary in human history back by millennia. And it forces a new question upon us. If this is what they were capable of at the very start of this era, what forgotten chapters of human ingenuity and belief might have unfolded in the deep time that came before? A date isn't an origin story. 11,600 years, that's a line in the sand, the oldest one we've found, but it makes you wonder, was Göbekli Tepe really the first? Or is it just the first one that made it? The idea of a sudden genesis is compelling. A hunter-gatherer cathedral rising from nowhere, but history isn't usually that neat. What if this wasn't a beginning but a peak? Look at the carvings, the foxes, the cranes, all that symbolism. That's not a language you invent overnight. Art on that scale takes practice, it evolves. The sophistication in those pillars suggests a long development, a cultural grammar that had been forming for generations. Maybe centuries before the first stone at Göbekli Tepe was even cut. So where are the practice runs, the earlier, simpler versions? They could be lost. Wood rots, simple stone markers might have been reused or scattered, or they're still buried, waiting under other hills. To look for what came before, you look at the people who were there earlier. In the same region, a few centuries before, there were the Natufians, still hunter-gatherers but showing something new. They built semi-permanent settlements with stone foundations. They had elaborate burials, placing ornaments with the dead. They carved small, portable art that hints at a world where ritual and place were starting to connect. The Natufians weren't building stone rings, but they were laying the groundwork. Socially, ideologically, they were learning to stay put part of the year. Developing a sense of territory, of ancestry. Those are the preconditions for something like Göbekli Tepe. Maybe the leap to monumentality wasn't a blind jump. It was the next logical step for a society already anchoring itself to the land. The Natufians might have gathered at special sites for ceremonies. Over time, the desire to mark that specialness, to make it permanent, grand, could have grown. A stone circle starts with a post hole. A carved pillar begins with a painted symbol on a rock. The evidence for those humble beginnings is fragile. It vanishes. This perspective shifts how you see the temple complex. It frames it not as a miraculous anomaly, but as the earliest surviving peak of a much deeper mountain range. A mountain range mostly submerged in time. Göbekli Tepe is what endured because they built it to last and then they buried it. Countless other sites made of wood or unshaped stone or used for shorter periods returned to the earth without a trace. So the real story might be a long, slow burn, a tradition of gathering and marking sacred space that stretched back into the twilight of the Ice Age. Göbekli Tepe represents the moment that tradition found its most confident expression. It's a snapshot of a cultural evolution already in motion. And that opens a possibility. That the prehistory we think we know, the slow crawl from simple tools to complex society, might just be the last few pages of a much longer book. A book whose earlier chapters are written in materials that didn't survive. Telling stories we can only try to reconstruct from their magnificent stone-printed climax. The pillars themselves are what stand out. They come up from the ground in this quiet, identical shape. A capital T, it's an abstraction, a geometric form cut from solid limestone. For a long time, that's how they were seen, just abstract megaliths, impressive but a mystery. Then, as more were found, details started to appear. On the sides of some, you see faint lines, carved in low relief. They look like arms, long, thin, coming down from the shoulders of the T. And at the ends, sometimes you can see hands, fingers carefully carved, resting on the stone stomach of the pillar. That changes everything. That simple T-shape isn't just a shape anymore. It becomes a stylized human form, a huge, simplified person standing there forever. The abstraction is intentional. These aren't portraits. There are no faces, no individual features. That seems to be the point. They stand for the idea of a person, or maybe a being beyond a person. The head of the T is massive, dominant. It could mean intellect or spirit, or just an overwhelming presence. The arms and hands suggest a posture of power or readiness, or maybe a gesture of offering or blessing. turned inward toward the sacred space inside the enclosure. Who or what do they represent? The ideas are deep. They could be ancestors, honored forebears of the clans who built this place, made into stone to watch over their descendants. Their presence would root the ceremonies in deep time, connecting the living community to a lineage going back into myth. Another thought is they are deities. Gods of the hunt, of the wild, of the sky, given this minimal, imposing form. The lack of faces might mean they aren't individuals but embodiments of cosmic forces. Or they could be guardians, sentinels placed there to protect the sacred circle, to keep the rituals pure, to stand between the people and whatever was outside. Seeing them as human forms changes how you experience the space. You aren't just in a stone circle, you're in a gathering. The central pillars in each enclosure, often the largest and most detailed, might be the chief figures. The smaller ones around them could be attendants or a community of stone witnesses. When people gathered here for their rituals, they weren't alone. They were performing in the company of stone beings. The rituals were watched, the chants were heard, the feasts were observed by these silent, permanent participants. It creates a powerful, immersive theology. The architecture itself becomes the congregation. Then the carvings of wild animals on the pillars take on another meaning. They aren't just symbols on a wall, they are the attributes of these stone beings. The fox isn't just carved on the pillar, it belongs to that pillar being. It's part of its essence, its power. The pillar isn't a canvas, it's an entity decorated with the spirits of the world it oversees. This turns the enclosures from architectural sites into theatrical spaces. The rituals performed there were a dialogue between the living, breathing, temporary community of humans and the eternal, watching community of stone. Every ceremony reinforced that connection. It acknowledged that humanity wasn't acting upon a passive world. They were engaging with a world that was alive, conscious, and represented right there among them. On those quiet hills 11,000 years ago, they built a stage, and then they carved the audience. Within the stone circles, the layout tells you something. You see the ring of smaller pillars, a kind of community, but at the heart, opposite the entrance, there are two. They're taller, more massive, more carved. They're the focal point, the anchors. That pairing is deliberate, and it's the fifth mystery of Göbekli Tepe. In a place built for gathering, why do these two hold the central position? The immediate thought is mythological. They could be a divine pair, a foundational couple from their cosmology. Many later myths start with such a pair, gods of sky and earth or the first ancestors. These central pillars facing each other might be stone embodiments of that primordial duality. The rituals in the circle could have been about honoring that balance, or mediating between the two forces they represent. Another theory looks upward. Their alignment might be astronomical. In some enclosures, the sightline between these two pillars points toward celestial events. The rising of a star or the solstice sun. If that's true, then they aren't just statues, they're giant gun sights framing a moment in the cosmic cycle. Rituals timed to that moment would connect the community to the orderly motion of the heavens, in contrast to the wildness of the animal world on the stones. The pillars become both monument and calendar. This motif of a significant pair echoes far beyond. The twin mountains in later myths, the two pillars at temple entrances. The symbolic twins who found cities. The pattern suggests a deep human inclination to understand the world through complementary opposites, light and dark, male and female, life and death. The builders of Göbekli Tepe may have been giving this concept its earliest architectural expression. By placing this pair at the center, they were stating that this duality was the axis of their world. The social implications are profound. A cosmology built around a central pair suggests a social structure that reflected it. There may have been dual leadership, a ritual leader and a practical organizer, or representatives of two main lineages. The act of building, requiring coordination, might have been overseen by such a paired authority. The architecture didn't just reflect their beliefs. It likely helped organize their social order. Everyone who entered knew their place in relation to those central pillars, and by extension, their place in the community. So these two silent giants are more than decoration. They're the keystone of the complex's meaning. They transform the enclosure from a meeting place into a model of the universe. A structured, hierarchical cosmos with powerful, paired forces at its heart. And if their gaze was fixed on the stars, then this model connected the very small, the human community below, to the very large, the timeless cycles of the sky. It was a map of reality made from limestone, where every ritual was a journey across its terrain. The sky above that hill would have been clear, completely dark. No lights, no haze, just stars, and for people living by natural cycles, that sky was more than just something to look at. It was a clock, a calendar. A story. Some researchers think the builders of Göbekli Tepe were reading it and carving what they saw into the stone. That idea changes the site, from a temple on the ground to a possible observatory. An early attempt to map the heavens. There's a key piece to this, Pillar 43, sometimes called the Vulture stone. Its surface is covered in symbols. A large vulture, below it a scorpion, to the side a headless man, and these round shapes scattered. They look like bags or maybe objects in the sky. For a long time, these were seen as powerful symbols, but earthbound, mythic. Then a different idea came up. What if this was a specific record? An astronomer, Martin Sweatman, and others proposed the animals are constellations. As they would have looked over 10,000 years ago, the vulture could be Sagittarius, the scorpion is Scorpius, the headless man might be Orion, and those round symbols could be a swarm of comet fragments. So the theory says this pillar marks a catastrophic event. A date from the proposed alignment points to around 10,950 BCE. That time coincides with evidence for a period of rapid cooling, the Younger Dryas. Some scientists think that cooling was triggered by a comet impact. So the pillar becomes a monument, a stone age warning about a disaster from the sky. Other things at the site support the astronomy idea, the orientation of some enclosures. The positioning of the central T-pillars, they seem to line up with points on the horizon, the rising of Sirius, the setting sun at the winter solstice. These aren't random, they suggest careful observation. Over generations, the architecture itself becomes an instrument for marking time. Now, this interpretation is debated. Archaeoastronomy is tricky. It's easy to see patterns that weren't intended. Mainstream archaeology is cautious. It emphasizes the ritual nature of the carvings. Not a literal star map, but even skeptics acknowledge the connection these people felt with the sky. Whether Pillar 43 records a specific comet or a general myth about sky gods, the conclusion is similar. Göbekli Tepe was a place where humanity was trying to understand its place in a vast, orderly cosmos. The earth and the sky weren't separate, they were one system. By building rings aligned to the stars, they were anchoring their community to the rhythms of the universe, seeking meaning, maybe safety, in the predictable turn of the heavens above an unpredictable world. That cosmic dimension adds a layer to what they did. They weren't just building for their community, they were building for the universe, trying to converse with the forces that moved the stars. But the temple might not have just reflected a changing world, it might have changed it. That's the most radical idea about Göbekli Tepe, that this place wasn't just older than farming. It was the cause, the spark. Think about those seasonal gatherings, hundreds, maybe thousands of people coming to this hill for weeks or months. They had to be fed. The animal bones show evidence of huge feasts. Feeding a temporary city like that requires a staggering amount of food, more than casual foraging could reliably supply. It creates a new pressure, a logistical demand for food that was predictable, storable, transportable. That demand might have pushed people toward a solution they were already near: cultivation. The wild ancestors of wheat and barley grew all around in the hills. Hunter-gatherers had always harvested them, but to guarantee enough grain to feed the builders and the celebrants year after year, they might have started to intervene. To protect the best stands of wild grass, to clear away other plants, to scatter seeds in good spots. It's not full-scale farming yet, it's a step managing nature. Moving from harvesting what you find to encouraging what you need. The same logic works for animals. The gazelle and aurochs hunted for the feasts were wild. But the need for a steady supply of meat, hides, bone for tools that could have spurred early attempts at herd management, keeping young animals, guiding migrations. Creating a more reliable relationship with the source of the feast. This is the core of the Cathedral Hypothesis. The monumental construction project created the social and economic conditions that made agriculture not just possible but necessary. The temple came first, and the need to sustain its builders and their rituals then drove the innovation. It flips the narrative. We thought society settled down and then built temples. This suggests they built a temple, and the effort of building it taught them how to settle down. The evidence from the region adds layers. Archaeobotanists found that the very types of wild grains first domesticated, like einkorn wheat, grow naturally around Göbekli Tepe. The site sits in the genetic homeland for these crops. It's not just a location coincidence, it's a convergence. The social machine of the temple, demanding vast food reserves, was positioned right on top of the raw material for a food revolution. Of course, this is debated. Many experts caution against a single cause for something as complex as domestication. It was likely a slow process with many factors: climate, population pressures, social and ritual practices. The chicken or egg scenario may never be fully resolved, but the possibility is transformative. It changes Göbekli Tepe from a spectacular endpoint of the hunter-gatherer world into a potential starting mechanism for the agricultural world. Instead of a monument built by the first farmers, it becomes a monument that created the first farmers. The rituals in those stone circles might have been about more than communing with animal spirits. They might have been the glue for a cooperative experiment so large, so demanding, that it forced humanity to take its first conscious steps toward controlling nature. The sanctuary on the hill may not have been celebrating a new way of life. It may have been the crucible where that new way of life was forged. Göbekli Tepe's life on the hilltop didn't last forever. The vibrant activity there slowly faded. The great feast stopped. The sound of chisels, the chants, they fell silent. After maybe 2,000 years of use, the place wasn't destroyed. It was just left. The last enclosures were filled in, the final rituals were done, and the people walked away. That quiet abandonment is the sixth mystery. Why leave behind your most sacred heart? The reasons are probably woven together. One thread is the environment. The world was warming. The climate settled into the pattern we know now. Forests spread. The migratory herds that once supplied the feasts, their routes may have shifted, or their numbers dwindled. The very abundance that made those big seasonal gatherings possible could have diminished. Feeding the crowds became harder. Another thread is their own success. The temple complex might have been too successful. The cooperation, the organization, the knowledge of plant and animal management it fostered, that didn't vanish. It diffused. The people who gathered here took those skills back to their home territories. The need to travel to a central sanctuary lessened. Smaller, permanent villages began to thrive. Why make a long pilgrimage when your community and its rituals could be sustained right where you lived? The agricultural way of life, which Göbekli Tepe may have helped incubate, ultimately made the site obsolete. It was the mother hive. Once the swarms had their own colonies, the original nest grew quiet. A spiritual shift is also possible. The The wild animal gods on the pillars belonged to a hunter's worldview. As society became more focused on sowing and reaping, on herding and ownership, the central deities may have changed. New spirits of fertility, of the harvest, of the hearth, might have risen. The old cosmic order set in stone on that hill may have felt distant from daily life in a farming village. The site wasn't rejected, it was respectfully retired. Its powerful old gods were given a dignified rest. Its legacy, though, didn't disappear. It flowed into the new age. Look at Çatalhöyük, a famous Neolithic town that flourished over 1,000 years later, hundreds of miles to the west. The art there is different, focused on domestic life, on bulls and goddess figures, but the echoes are there, the importance of ritual within the home. The veneration of animal spirits, the use of symbolism to encode belief, the mental architecture, the capacity to create a rich symbolic world and build a society around it, was first fully realized at Göbekli Tepe. Çatalhöyük and other sites are its cultural descendants, so the end of Göbekli Tepe's active life wasn't a failure, it was a transition. The sanctuary had done its work. It gathered humanity, it taught people to cooperate on a grand scale. It pointed toward a new relationship with the earth. Then, like a parent watching a child walk away, it receded into the past. The people moved into a world of villages, fields, and flocks. They carried with them the social bonds and the shared myths forged on that windy hilltop. The stones were buried, but the ideas they represented were planted, and from those ideas a new civilization would grow. The symbols on those stones, they don't stay put. They show up again centuries later, thousands of miles away. It's a pattern. It points to something bigger than one place. There's this H shape. At Göbekli Tepe, it's on some of the pillars. Just a simple geometric mark. Then you look at ancient Sumer 2,000 years later to the southeast. You see that same H. It marks temple doors there. A sign for a sacred gateway. So the question is, did the idea travel, or did two cultures separately come up with the same mark for a door to the divine? Then there's the bag, that pouch held by some of the T-shaped pillars. It's one of the site's lasting mysteries, and its path is even more striking. You find it in Mesopotamian art. Winged figures carry it. You find it in ancient Egypt, and then, most striking, you find it across the ocean. In Olmec art from Central America, carved figures hold something almost identical. The resemblance is unsettling. It doesn't have an easy answer. What do these echoes mean? Scholars generally work with three possibilities. First is direct contact. Could ideas or people have traveled those huge distances in deep time? Could they have carried these symbols? It's a compelling idea, but the timelines, the gaps in the record, it's hard to prove. Second is parallel development. The idea that humans facing similar big questions often find similar symbolic answers. The bag might be a container for knowledge. Or the sacred breath of life, a tool of creation. Different cultures on their own might have all settled on a simple pouch for that deep concept. The human mind works in recognizable patterns. Third is diffusion from an ancient center. This doesn't mean Sumerians went to Turkey. It means a slower seepage of ideas over generations. Göbekli Tepe wasn't isolated. It was part of a wide Neolithic network across the Fertile Crescent. Symbols, myths, tools, they could have moved along trade routes through stories. With a slow movement of people, over thousands of years, these motifs could have spread. They could have evolved, taken root far away, their original source forgotten. The truth is probably a mix. Some connections might be coincidence of form. Others might be the slow, persistent drift of a very old idea. What's clear is the pattern itself. These symbols from a 10,000-year-old site in Anatolia have relatives in the foundational art of later civilizations. That suggests Göbekli Tepe's legacy wasn't just about inspiring farming or social structure. Its symbolic language, its way of encoding ideas about the sacred, might have entered a deep cultural reservoir, a reservoir that later societies drew from, whether they knew it or not. These repeating motifs turn the site from a local wonder into a possible node in a vast, ancient web of meaning. They hint that the ideas from that hill didn't just vanish when the place was buried. They went underground in a cultural sense. They traveled, they changed form, they resurfaced later, shaping the spiritual imagination of humanity for millennia. The stones were silent, but the symbols they carried started a long, quiet journey across the map of human history. The work now is as much about preservation as it is about discovery. These stones had 11,000 years of perfect stillness. Now they're exposed. Sunlight, wind, rain, even the humidity of human breath, they're all new threats. The carvings only survived because they were hidden. So the archaeologists there in southeastern Turkey, they face this balance. Every layer of soil they remove reveals a masterpiece, but it also starts a new clock. A clock of erosion, so the work is slow, it's meticulous, it's a conversation with the past, not a race. To protect what they find, they've built these great protective canopies over the main areas. They're not just tops, they're engineered shelters. They shield the delicate limestone from direct sun and weather, but the work continues underneath. It's a modern roof for a temple that hasn't had one since the dawn of time, and the tools now are digital alongside the trowels and brushes. Teams use high-resolution laser scanners. They create perfect three-dimensional maps of every pillar, every carving. That digital record is a backup. It's an insurance policy against any future loss. It lets researchers study the finest details of a relief without ever touching the stone. They can measure wear patterns, analyze tool marks, share this data with experts anywhere, all from a computer. Then there's ground-penetrating radar, another invisible tool. It sends pulses into the earth, reads the echoes to map what's below without digging a single hole. And the radar surveys have shown something astonishing. The known enclosures are just the beginning. There are maybe 20 more circles still buried, waiting in the earth across the hilltop. So Göbekli Tepe isn't a single temple. It's an entire sacred landscape, and most of it is still untouched. That changes the scale of the story again. What we've seen so far, as breathtaking as it is, might only be a fraction of the whole. Each new enclosure could hold a different configuration of pillars. A new set of symbols, another chapter in the mythic narrative carved into the hill. The excavation is planned for generations, not years. It proceeds with this profound respect. The goal isn't just to uncover everything, but to understand it, to ensure it survives for future generations to study, to wonder at. We've become the temporary custodians of this legacy. The people who built it were the first custodians. They sealed it with earth. Now we are the next, using fabric and laser light to shield it. Our tools are different, but the intention connects us across the millennia. To honor and preserve a message from a world we are only beginning to understand. And with so much still hidden, the greatest revelations are probably still ahead. Sleeping under the same sun-drenched earth, that canopy protects more than the visible stones. It's sheltering something deeper. After decades of work, maybe only 10% of Göbekli Tepe is actually excavated. The rest, over 90%, is still under that same hill. That's the seventh mystery, really. The weight of what's unknown. What we've found, these circles and pillars, might just be the beginning. An introduction, a story written in stone across a whole landscape. Under the untouched soil, there could be older layers, earlier versions of the enclosures. The first attempts at building something monumental, or different structures altogether. Workshops for the carvers, storage for the feasts, ritual spaces we haven't imagined. And artifacts that could answer things, tools that show how they carved so precisely, personal objects that show what individuals believed, maybe even traces of pigment. The colors they use to paint these stones, to bring the animals to life, the pull to know is strong, to dig faster, to see everything now, but archaeology resists that. It's a patient discipline. Every scoop of earth removed is a page turned for good. The context where something lay, what layer, what was beside it, that's often more valuable than the object itself. Rushing destroys that, so the work is slow, meticulous, it's ethical, a covenant with the past to preserve its integrity, not just its treasures. That careful pace is a form of respect. It lets future generations with better tools come and ask their own questions. This unexcavated majority isn't empty. It's a promise. The story of Göbekli Tepe is still being written. One trowel scrape at a time, each season could reveal something that rewrites a paragraph or a whole chapter. The first chapter of civilization, most of its pages are still closed. We've read the opening lines. The rest of the book waits in the dark earth, holding secrets for a future that's eager to listen. The stones can only tell part of the story. To hear Göbekli Tepe, you need more than an archaeologist's ear. You need a whole chorus of sciences. Modern archaeology isn't a solitary thing anymore. It's a collaboration, a fusion of fields. It turns one site into a nexus for understanding an entire era. That's how you build a picture of a world without photographs. Without written records, take the animal bones in the fill. To an archaeologist, that's evidence of feasting. To a geneticist, it's a library. You can extract ancient DNA from those fragments. Identify species with precision, trace lineages. You might even detect signs of early herd management, a whisper of the shift from hunting to husbandry. Long before it was obvious in the shape of the bones. Then there's the stone itself. Where did it come from? That's for a geologist. They analyze the limestone's mineral signature. Match the pillars to specific local quarries. That tells you about logistics, how far they moved these monoliths, what routes they might have used. It maps that physical effort onto the ancient landscape. But why build here? Why at this specific time? That's a question for climatology. You study ancient pollen cores from lake beds, isotopes in stalagmites from caves. Reconstruct the paleoclimate. Paint a picture of the environment 11,000 years ago. Was it a wet period of plenty or a drier time? A time that required new social strategies just to survive. The temple didn't exist in a vacuum. It was a response to a very specific world. The most personal insights might come from the people themselves. No human remains have been found at the sanctuary. But bone fragments from the feasts hold clues. Through stable isotope analysis, you read the chemical signatures in the bone collagen. These isotopes act like a dietary passport. They reveal what an animal ate, and by extension, the environment it lived in. They can hint at migration patterns. Did the gazelle hunted here live locally year-round? Or were they part of a distant herd? That would suggest the feasts were timed to annual migrations. This collaborative approach is the strength of it now. It's a conversation between the trowel and the mass spectrometer, between the survey map and the DNA sequencer. Each specialist brings a piece. The archaeologist provides the context, the layer where the bone was found. The chemist provides the data, what that bone is made of. The botanist identifies the microscopic seeds in the soil. Together, they don't just describe a temple. They reconstruct a living moment, the chill of the morning air, the smell of roasting meat, the taste of wild grains, the sound of a chant echoing off limestone pillars. Pillars carved with beings from the spirit world. This fusion turns Göbekli Tepe from a monument into a portal. It lets you ask more nuanced questions. Not just what did they build, but what did they eat, and what does that tell us about their relationship with the land? Not just when did they build it, but what was the climate like, and how might that have shaped their vision? The stones give us the architecture of their belief. The interdisciplinary sciences help us imagine the breath that gave that belief life. Could the story of this place have lasted? The carvings are silent, but their themes aren't. They show a world of wild animals and powerful beings, order carved from chaos. These are the raw materials of myth. We can't prove a direct line from these stones to Gilgamesh or the tales of Egypt, but the echoes are there. They feel like distant versions of the same human experience. Take the most basic idea, a mound rising from the waters of chaos. In Egypt, the god Atum stands on the Benben stone, that first piece of land. In Sumerian myth, the world forms from the union of fresh water and salt water, creating a cosmic mountain. And Göbekli Tepe itself is a hill, a potbelly hill shaped and built upon. For the builders, this wasn't just a location, it was the place, the center. The point where their ordered, ritual world began. Could the memory of such a sacred hill have persisted, transformed over thousands of years into a symbolic mound in later myth? It's a possibility. Then the carvings, the fierce animals, boars, foxes, scorpions, snakes, they aren't in peaceful scenes. They show tension, power, a wild energy. That connects to a universal struggle in myth, the battle between chaos and order. In later stories, heroes fight beasts that represent untamed nature. Gilgamesh and Enkidu slaying the bull of heaven, the serpent Apophis threatening the sun god Ra. The builders here were hunter-gatherers. Their survival was a negotiation with these forces. By carving them onto the pillars, they weren't just showing animals. They might have been engaging with the powers of chaos itself. The ritual in the circle could have been a reenactment, imposing a sacred human order on that wildness. The temple was the arena for that struggle. There's also the T-pillars, those silent, faceless forms. They could be ancestors or gods or guardians. This finds echoes too, the idea of powerful, silent stone beings watching over the world, from the statues of Easter Island to the standing stones of Europe. The impulse to raise a permanent form to guard a sacred space is global. Göbekli Tepe might be the earliest, most sophisticated expression of that, the idea that a stone could be a being. That a circle of them could hold a space for the divine. That seems to have started here in the Neolithic. We have to be careful. Drawing these lines is speculative. It's not hard evidence of one culture passing stories to another, but it might be evidence of something else, a shared human narrative grammar. The people of Göbekli Tepe were asking the same questions we all do. Where did we come from? How do we find our place in a world of dangerous and beautiful forces? What's the relationship between humanity and the wild? Their answers were carved in limestone. Later cultures, in different times and places, wrote their answers in poetry and inscriptions. The names changed. The gods wore different costumes, but the core dramas stayed familiar. Creation from a center, the taming of chaos, the veneration of ancestral powers. Göbekli Tepe may not be the literal source for those later myths, but it's an early testament to the moment humanity began building these grand stories in a permanent form. It's a foundational point in the network of human storytelling. The stones are the first chapter of a book we're still writing. The word primitive, it's a heavy word. It suggests something simple, a simple life, a simple mind, and this idea that things move in a line, from basic to complex, but Göbekli Tepe it breaks that. It forces you to confront your own assumptions. For more than a century, the story we told about human progress was a ladder, hunter-gatherers at the bottom, living hand to mouth, and at the top, agricultural civilizations, with their cities, their writing, their art. The assumption was clear: you needed a surplus. Extra food, extra time, that's what created the conditions for everything else, for intellectual life, for spiritual life. You needed a granary before you could have a temple. This site turns that inside out. Here, the temple came first. The complexity came first. The intellectual complexity, the spiritual complexity, the artistic complexity. The people who carved these pillars, who coordinated to raise them, who put a whole cosmology into stone, they did this without the material surplus we thought was necessary. Their drive to build something monumental, to express a symbolic understanding of the world that wasn't a luxury. It wasn't something that came from having extra. It was a fundamental impulse, a human capacity, the artistry on those pillars, the precise lines of a fox, the coiled tension of a snake. That's not primitive art. It's masterful, it's intentional symbolism. It shows a complex relationship with the natural world and the social organization it took to build it, the planning, the division of labor, the sustained cooperation. That's not a primitive social structure. It's a highly evolved system, a system of communal purpose. This changes what we mean by advancement. For so long, advancement was measured in material terms. The size of cities, the complexity of technology, the scale of surplus. Göbekli Tepe asks us to measure it another way, in the depth of symbolic thought. In the strength of communal bonds, bonds forged for a shared vision, a vision that wasn't about utility, in the capacity for awe and the desire to make that awe permanent. By these measures, the builders were profoundly advanced. They were architects of meaning long before they were managers of crops. This is a paradigm shift. And it has a quiet power. It challenges you to look at all human societies differently, past and present, to see cultural differences not as steps on a single ladder, but as different expressions of the same profound human capacities. A nomadic culture with an intricate oral history, a deep knowledge of an ecosystem. A rich ceremonial life. That's not a simpler way of being. It's a different constellation, a different arrangement of the same sophisticated traits we see at Göbekli Tepe. The lesson is one of respect. It asks us to strip away the condescension, to strip away a word like primitive, and to recognize that intellectual and spiritual complexity. It's a human universal. It appears wherever people gather, under any material conditions. Our ancestors on that hilltop in Turkey, they weren't waiting to become civilized. They were already living a civilization. A civilization of the mind and spirit, one whose monumental echoes we're only just starting to hear. The artistry is everywhere, and it's all of a piece. That's the eighth mystery. You move from one enclosure to another. These pillars were carved centuries apart, but the style holds, the lines are clean. The animals they're rendered with a confident, flowing realism. This isn't tentative, it's a mature artistic language, and it was executed with flint and obsidian, on unforgiving limestone. So where did this tradition come from? How was it taught? How was it preserved across generations? These were people we used to think of as nomadic. This points to something we don't usually associate with hunter-gatherers, a formalized craft, a school of artistry. Think about the technique. Many of the carvings are in bas relief. The artist doesn't just incise a line, they carve away the background. They leave the figure standing out from the stone. That requires planning. You need a mental image of the finished work. Before the first chip is struck, it requires an understanding of depth, of how light will fall across the raised form, and the tools were simple, flint chisels, hammerstones, abrasive sand. To get such smooth curves and precise details with those materials, that speaks of immense skill and patience. This wasn't a hobby. This was a specialization. The consistency of the iconography across the site is even more telling. The T-shape of the pillars, the way arms are rendered on some of them. The specific set of animals, foxes, cranes, snakes, scorpions, and the way they are posed. This isn't random. It's a shared symbolic vocabulary. Someone or some group decided what these forms meant. And that meaning was passed down for centuries through the construction of multiple enclosures. That suggests the presence of master carvers, knowledge holders. Individuals who didn't spend their days hunting or gathering. They were supported by the community to dedicate themselves to this sacred craft. They were the keepers of the style, the guardians of the canon. They would have trained apprentices, passing on not just the technical skill of stoneworking, but the sacred meanings behind each symbol. Which animal belonged where, what story the arrangement on a pillar was meant to tell. You might think of them as an academy, a Stone Age guild. Their classroom was the quarry and the building site. Their curriculum was myth, astronomy, and the precise angle of a chisel. This formalized transmission of knowledge is a hallmark of complex culture. It shows a society investing in its intellectual and spiritual capital, making sure its most important ideas weren't lost, but were refined and reproduced with each new generation. This sustained tradition, it changes how we see the site. Göbekli Tepe wasn't just a project, it was an institution. The stones are its permanent record. But the living heart of it was a flowing river of knowledge, passed from master to apprentice, from one generation's vision to the next steady hand. The true monument wasn't just the circle of pillars, it was the invisible circle of minds that conceived it, and the chain of teachers and students that kept its meaning alive for over 1,000 years. That continuity of thought, carved in stone, that may be its most human mystery of all. Göbekli Tepe's stones are silent, but they've found a voice now. It's a voice that goes beyond the archaeology journals. It started on a hilltop in Turkey, and then it moved onto television screens, into magazines. Reaching a global audience, that story, with its reversed timeline, that profound mystery, it was irresistible for documentaries, big productions, sweeping aerial shots. Dramatic music, they presented the pillars as a riddle that could rewrite everything. Specials looked at the astronomy theories, the hunter-gatherer paradox, the possibility of a forgotten chapter in human history. Each frame added to the awe, turning the dig into a cinematic event. That visibility started something else. A journey into speculative fiction, into alternative history. The gaps in our knowledge became a canvas, the lack of writing, the unknown purpose. For some, Göbekli Tepe stopped being a Neolithic sanctuary. It became evidence of a lost, advanced civilization, a progenitor culture wiped out by a cataclysm, a comet strike, leaving these cryptic ruins as a warning. That narrative taps into a powerful myth, the idea of a golden age, a superior wisdom from before a fall. It resonates, it speaks to a longing, a deep human longing for a grand, singular origin. The academic response to all this is cautious distance. Mainstream archaeology moves slowly. It deals in probabilities, in painstaking evidence, in peer review. Scholars emphasize what the data shows, a spectacular achievement by complex hunter-gatherers. They point to the gradual development of symbolism in the region, the lack of any futuristic technology at the site, the clear evolutionary path from Göbekli Tepe to later Neolithic villages. Those wild animal carvings, they argue, are profound, precisely because they reflect the worldview of their time, not because they hide an anachronistic secret. The divide isn't just facts versus fantasy. It's two different ways of engaging with the past. One seeks a definitive, often sensational, answer. The other is comfortable with uncertainty, building understanding layer by layer. This cultural footprint, from documentary to myth, is itself a kind of artifact. It reveals less about 11,000 years ago and more about us. Göbekli Tepe acts as a mirror. In its monumental stones, we see our own desires reflected, the hunger for a clear origin story, the fascination with catastrophe and survival, the romance of a forgotten wisdom. The site's power is in holding multiple truths at once. It is a solid archaeological fact, one that revolutionizes prehistory, and it is a blank slate. A slate upon which we project our deepest questions, who we are, where we came from. That dual life, as a scientific cornerstone and a cultural icon, means its mysteries will simmer. They'll simmer in the modern imagination, long after the final excavation report is filed. The work at Göbekli Tepe is far from finished. The most exciting parts might still be ahead. Buried in the earth or hidden in the stone itself, The future of research here is about looking deeper, using new eyes. The first goal is to see without digging. Ground-penetrating radar, other geophysical tools, they'll map the entire hilltop, create a three-dimensional blueprint of everything still hidden. That map will guide excavations for the next century. It'll show where the oldest layers are, how the enclosures connect across the landscape. It's a promise of structure, a shape for the unknown, but the temple complex wasn't an island. Where did the workers live during those massive seasonal gatherings? Finding their temporary camps is a major quest now. Those campsites probably on the slopes or in nearby valleys. They'd be a treasure trove. They could hold the everyday objects the sacred precinct lacks: tools, hearths, personal ornaments, offering a glimpse into the builders' domestic lives. An intimate one, and the quarries, locating the exact spots where those 10-ton pillars were cut from the bedrock. That will tell us about their engineering. The tool marks left behind are a silent manual, a record of their stoneworking techniques. Then there are the secrets locked inside the stone itself. Among the finds are large, shallow stone vessels, carved from the same limestone. What were they used for? Advanced residue analysis can detect microscopic traces of what they once held. Was it water for a purification rite, wild grains for a sacred offering, maybe a fermented drink for the rituals? Each chemical signature is a direct clue to the sensory experience of the ceremonies, the tastes, the smells, the materials of their practice. These technical pursuits lead to the biggest questions. The most human ones, questions that may never have definitive answers, but they define the mystery. What language did they speak around these pillars? The sounds that filled those circles are lost, but linguists study the deep roots of language families, wondering if echoes of that ancient tongue survive. In words we still use today, what were the specific rituals? Did they involve chanting, processions, silent meditation? The architecture suggests choreography. A path to enter, a central focus, a space for an audience of stone beings. And what of music and dance? No instruments have been found, but that doesn't mean they weren't present. Music leaves no fossil. The rhythm of their work, though, the coordinated pulling of ropes, the strike of hammerstones, these themselves are a form of percussion. It's easy to imagine that rhythm transforming into ceremony, a dance under the stars within a ring of carved animals to honor the spirits of the hunt or the turn of the seasons. These are the textures of a living culture, the parts that fade first. Göbekli Tepe is not a puzzle we are close to solving. It's an active frontier. Each answer reveals three new questions. The site reminds us the deep past isn't a static exhibit. It's a conversation between our tools and their stones. Between our curiosity and their silence, the research ahead is an act of listening to a story that's still being told. One careful scan, one microscopic sample, one uncovered stone at a time. We're looking back now from the edge of the excavation, across that chasm of time, the journey through Göbekli Tepe, through those silent stones. It doesn't leave you with a simple answer. It leaves you with a different sense of what's possible. We walked with a people who saw the world not as a resource to manage, but as a living, sacred drama. Their legacy isn't a list of kings, it isn't conquests, it's a testament carved in limestone, a testament to the human spirit's need to seek meaning, to build community, to reach for the monumental. This temple complex is older than farming. It rewrites a fundamental story. It shows that the drive to create, to gather for something more than survival, that isn't a product of civilization. It's the spark that ignites it, the artistic mastery on those pillars, the coordination it took to raise them, the complex cosmology they encode. All of that came from a society we once called merely surviving. They weren't primitive, they were pioneers of a different kind of wealth measured in shared belief, in collective ambition. The stones of Göbekli Tepe, they humble our modern assumptions. They ask us to reconsider what true advancement is. Is it just the accumulation of technology, material surplus, or is it also the depth of our symbolic thought? The strength of our social bonds, the courage to build temples in the wilderness of an unknown world. This place is a quiet rebuttal, a powerful one. To the idea of a linear, simplistic past, it reveals our deep history not as some barren prelude, but as a rich and nuanced world, full of innovation. Spirituality, forgotten chapters of human genius, you leave this hilltop with a new lens, a lens to view all of human history, maybe even our own place in it. The ambitions of those ancient builders echo across 11,000 years. They remind us the capacity for awe, for cooperation, for creating lasting meaning. It's woven into the fabric of our species. It was there at the dawn of our story, a legacy written not on papyrus but on the bones of the earth.